Okay, so the case that I have today is Irving Independent School District versus Tatro, I think is how you say it. This was decided by the Supreme Court of the United States of America in 1984. Basically what happens is there's a young girl, she was 8 years old at the time. Her name was Amber Tatro, and she suffered from spina bifida, which left her with a speech impairment, some other issues. But the issue at effect right here is that she had the inability to voluntarily empty her bladder. So she had to go through a process. She had to go through a process which was called clean intermittent catheterization every 3 to 4 hours in order to prevent damage to her kidneys, and it emptied her bladder for her. So what happened is the family wanted the school to provide this service to their daughter. And that's what started the lawsuit. Basically, when it came before the Supreme Court, they had to decide between two issues. Number one, if the Educational Handicapped Act of 1973 required the petitioner to provide this clean intermittent catheterization, and number two, if the 504 creates that obligation. As I went through the case, it kind of talked about how that it was definitely the responsibility of the school district to provide that service. They did not need to provide the tools or the instruments, but they did need to provide the service. The reason that it says that they needed to provide the service is because it was classified as a supportive service rather than a medical service. And a medical service is something that requires a physician to do. But a supportive service is simply something with something that someone with a little bit of training can do. And it says in the very first of the book that the procedure is a simple one that may be performed in a few minutes by a layperson with less than an hour's training. So because of that, this was not classified as a medical service, but it was a supportive service. Also, the family did not ask the school to provide the tools or the instruments, but simply to provide the service. So the Supreme Court came up with a couple of tests, a couple of things that had to happen in order to clarify this whole thing. But so on page 614 on the right-hand column, it says first, second, third, and finally. So some little tests on that side there that you can follow along if you want. But it says first, to be entitled to related services or supportive services, a child must be handicapped so as to require special education. So whatever the handicap the child has, that they need to require that special education. In this case, because Amber had spina bifida, which had left her with a speech impairment, and also a little bit of a couple other issues like that, she qualified under the special education statute. Secondly, it says only those services necessary to aid a handicapped child to benefit from special education must be provided regardless of how easily a school nurse or layperson can furnish them. So in this case, because the CIC, or the clean intermittent catheterization, allowed Amber to stay at school, they determined that that was a service that was necessary to aid her in the benefit or in the pursuit of her special education plan. Third, the regulations state that school nursing services must be provided only if they can be performed by a nurse or other qualified person, not if they must be performed by a physician. And that's basically the difference between medical services and supportive services. And then finally, it says, finally, we note that respondents are not asking petitioner to provide equipment that Amber needs for CIC. Merely, they seek only the services of a qualified person in that school. So by the time it finally got to the Supreme Court upheld all the rulings of the lower court, saying that they had to do that. In this case, then the family of Amber were trying to seek some attorney's fees and different things like that, but the Supreme Court ruled that they could not get those the attorney's fees were ineligible, that they were ineligible for compensation. But it created those 4 things on the test and upheld the statute that the school did have to provide this service to Amber because she met all 4 of those requirements. And that's the case.